It's always very worrying when you see a humanitarian crisis developing, when innocent civilians suffer, infants, kids, old folks, grandparents, sometimes as a by-side effect of military conflict, sometimes directly targeted. And in this case, what happened on the 7th of October when Hamas attacked Israel and launched vicious, horrible attacks against large numbers of civilians and killed 1,300 people, maybe more, mostly innocent civilians, is horrendous. It's something which could not be justified by any rationale whatsoever, whatever the background, whatever the historical situation. Nothing justifies such an action, either in law or indeed in human decency and morality. So that we have to be quite unequivocal about, and we came out immediately to condemn it. But after that having happened, what happens next? If you go by international law, the Israelis will have the right to self-defense, to defend themselves. I mean, Hamas has attacked us. They have a right to say, I have to take away the danger to me. It's not just international law, but it's also humanly impossible not to want to do that, having suffered such a grievous and terrifying attack. But in exercising that right, you have yourself to comply with international law, and that means the law of warfare, and that means that international humanitarian law, and you have to do all you can to minimize civilian casualties and see and address humanitarian concerns which are going to arise. And you have to do this not just because the law is written that way, but also because from Israel's own interests. If you just respond emotionally, cathartically, but in a way which doesn't help to solve the problem, you may get yourself into a much worse situation than you're in. And that is possible. And it's something which many countries in the world are concerned about and have spoken out about, including their closest friends. The Americans have taken this, have expressed this, the British, the Europeans have expressed this. We have expressed this too. And it's something which we are all focused on. You may have noticed an article, you probably didn't notice. There was a letter in the Financial Times a few days ago written by some very distinguished Jewish international jurists. They're really professors of international law. They've studied genocide, crimes against humanity, the Holocaust. They themselves are Jewish. They've got family, friends, relatives who have been caught up in the latest conflict, probably victims too. And they wrote this letter to say that we know what the pain is, we know what the law is, but we strongly counsel Israel and Israel's leaders to act in a restrained way, in a thoughtful way, in a way which will not make your problem worse or diminish your humanity. It's an FT article. Minister Shanmugam shared it on his Facebook page because he thought it was significant. And I think it's very significant that these are people who wish Israel well, who are expressing such concerns and such views. We wish Israel well. We also wish the Palestinians well. Our own population in Singapore, I think, are following events very closely. It always happens every time there is violence in the Middle East. And it's quite understandable. We're all connected to it. We all see the material online. We read the horrendous stories, heart-rending stories. When a bomb lands in a hospital, hundreds die. For what? Why? And you cry out for some comfort and some answer, which you don't always get. And particularly, I think the Muslim population in Singapore are very agitated about it because there's a certain feeling of empathy and compassion, particularly closely felt for the Palestinian cause. And it's completely understandable. And it's something which we have to take into account to explain that this is what the government also understands and expresses, but at the same time we also have to do what is the sensible thing to do for Singapore to maintain relations with both the Israelis as well as the Palestinians, and to do what we can to provide humanitarian support for the civilian victims, in Gaza especially, but also in Israel. And then to express our long-term position, which is that we believe that the two sides have to live in peace. There's really no alternative to that. And to live in peace, the only way to get there is to have a two-state solution. In other words, for the Palestinians to acknowledge that Israelis have a right to exist and to have a nation, a state, a country, and the Israelis to acknowledge that the Palestinians have a right to exist and to live in their own country. And you have to work towards such an outcome. It looks very far off. It has not made a lot of progress in the last 10, 15 years. But unless you can make progress in that direction, you are doomed to generations of bloodshed and tragedy. And I don't think either side really wants that. How to get from here to there, that's very hard, but I don't think we can afford to give up on that aspiration. And that's the way we have explained our position. A lot of questions have been filed in Parliament because it's a matter of naturally of great interest, and the MPs will express these concerns of their voters, of their constituents. And when Parliament sits at the beginning of November, we will have a full discussion